So today, in this brief moment, I will attempt to help you to understand trauma, but not just trauma, but trauma in the context of people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The theme that has been resonating throughout the morning, which is good, focuses a lot on the development and all of these beautiful things. But what I have not heard thus far is the psychological and clinical needs of our children and adults living with IDD. And as a clinical therapist and a clinical traumatologist, I can tell you that trauma is real. It is real whether you normal or not. The impact of trauma. And my dear colleague who went before me spoke about something that was so real, the loss of her child. The first instant of getting the information or the news is traumatic in itself, followed by whatever else to come. And so we need to understand that while we are doing all of this, we must also understand the psychological and the traumatic incidents that can occur with children and adults living with IDD. So persons with IDD are more likely to be exposed to trauma, and exposure to trauma makes IDD more likely. That is real. When we look at recognizing this endemic of trauma, in 2015, the Hug Foundation published When Disability is a Disguise, a guide to understand why mental health needs of the individual with intellectual and developmental disabilities are overlooked and ignored. Overlooked and ignored. And this is because we focus primarily on the disabilities and overshadow the mental health condition that is also present. So we focus a lot on the disability, and so the discrimination and everything that follows, it follows as a result of the disabilities. And because you can see it, you can feel it. But the mental illness, the trauma, is often forgotten because you cannot really see it and or feel it, you see? The report called for looking at IDD through a trauma-informed lens. People with disabilities are more vulnerable at every point in the life cycle of a traumatic event. And this is because of the limited knowledge, the skill set, the verbal skills. They are more vulnerable to being exposed to all forms of abuse. All forms of abuse. And they are less likely to tell someone about the abuse. And I'll take just 30 seconds to pause to remember someone that called me at 3 a.m. a morning. 3 a.m. they called me. They look up and they said, I look like a fellow who can help. And I couldn't understand because the person was saying to me they needed a social worker to go to the ministry to file something on their behalf. And I couldn't understand because I didn't understand a lot about, intellectual or developmental disability. And I said, so what, I cannot just go to the ministry, I need to see you, I need to do an assessment. And he said to me, I can't come out, I can't even call, because if I call during the day, they will beat me. And I couldn't understand, well, what do you mean they will beat you? And then he explained to me, he was living with Down syndrome. And the caretakers will beat him and starve him and not give him his medication that he needed. And he could not take it. So he was secretly reaching out to people. And he stumbled across my work on Facebook and reached out to me. And so it resonates with me that the power of trauma and abuse is real. And it is so real because our children and our adults who might be living with this cannot express oneself. The other case I got, that the young girl was burnt with an iron. Well, when they called me, I thought it was a child, so I was ready to send out, the team. Only to realize that the person was 24 years old. but her speech was impeded, and so she could not communicate. And so the 4 caretakers in that home went scot-free because she was told by the police they can't do anything. They don't know who do it, and the person can write a statement. So this child or this person, have to now live with this abuse. And it is less likely that they will tell someone about the pain that they endured. Dr. Karen, in 2012 Spectrum Institute study, she said, I have seen so much bullying and so much trauma that comes from having a disability. Citing 2012 study, she said that 70% said that they have been sexually, physically, or financially abused. And 90% of that abuse was ongoing. It meant that there was no end. And it was from childhood into adulthood. Just like this gentleman who said it has been going on for years. Only 37% report the abuse for fear that nothing will happen. So when you talk about understanding trauma in the context of IDD, children and adults living with IDD may experience high rate of abuse and neglect, including physical, sexual, and emotional, and we can go on and on, yeah? High rates of bullying, victims of violent crime, much like the iron. Family stress can turn into family violence. Institutionalization, because we are not sure how to deal with. Abandonment and isolation, restraint and seclusion. How do you tell if a particular symptom or behavior is evident of disability or related to trauma? That is a challenge. And the reason why it is a challenge for us, it is very difficult, one, for the person living with the disability to express if it is. And because people who are living with disabilities, especially on the further end of the spectrum, is prone to accidents, it passes off as an accident, or it passes off of something that was self-inflicted. And so a lot of times, people with severe self-injury, right? People with cuts, bruises, all of these different things are cast aside as, well, that happened during this event, or that happened there. All the while, the child or the person is being abused. When we look at the characteristics of the population that may influence incident of trauma, abuse, and neglect, they have found profound influences on brain development. We don't pay attention to brain development because we think that by virtue of having intellectual disability, something is wrong already. So we don't think that anything further can go wrong. But trauma exacerbates brain or slow brain development. The more prolonged the abuse or neglect, the more likely that permanent brain damage will occur. Not only are people with developmental disabilities more likely to be exposed to trauma, but exposure to trauma makes developmental delay more likely. So one works against and with the other. So if we are just concentrating on the IDT and we're not paying attention to the mental health, the developmental or the neurobiological makeup of the person, and this is then infused with trauma, we are further putting pressure on children. When we look at vulnerability to trauma, we speak to vulnerability, which is mediated by opportunity and intent of a perpetrator. What is profound, as in most cases of abuse, this is perpetrated by people who are charged with the responsibility to love and care for you. People of authority and people who were given responsibility to take care of you. So we're talking about people in the household, family members, bus drivers, school personnel, people working in homes or hospitals. They are some of the most likely perpetrators. Abuse most frequently occurs at home, the activities, schoolwork, and transportation. Lack of information and preparation for individual and their family about this issue and what can be done to lessen the vulnerability. You have to understand the baseline. You have to understand what your son or daughter gives. And the only time you can know when something is wrong is when you know when it is right. And if you don't understand when it is right, you will never see when it is wrong. More so for people living with IDD. It means then that there is a need for you to understand the baseline of this person. And so when you understand the baseline, you will then know when the person is above or below this line. And even if you're above, you know that something is wrong or something changed in the environment. If you're below, you can also deduce that something is wrong or something changed within the environment. The only way you can determine that is if you know what your child gives. So when the child comes home from school that day, behaving in a particular manner, which seems strange or odd, you should be able to pick it up without the child saying to you that mom, dad, caregiver, this happened today. But the only way we can do that is if we understand the level of vulnerability. So I will go through quickly some of the signs, just of the major three. Sexual abuse. Physical signs of sexual abuse are the same for both people living with and or without disability. However, people with disabilities may not disclose the assault, may not disclose. By the time they do, all medical evidence would have been erased. So it makes it even more difficult for prosecution. So it means, dear members here, that we need to be vigilant. We need to be vigilant for our children when we are bathing them. We have to understand, just like everybody else, if you have been abused, there are certain behaviors you will see when you go to the bathroom. Whether or not you're allowing me to come in the bathroom all the time and then all of a sudden you don't want anybody in there. You're closing the door. All of those things. People with cognitive disabilities may not show obvious signs of distress, but you must pay attention to the mood and conduct. The mood and conduct. People assaulted in medical facilities, Care Acute Hospital, for example, rarely disclose abuse, much like our elder abuse, because they think if they report it, someone will abuse me more. I jumped ahead, so I'm just going to go back to physical abuse. And some of the signs, again, it is similar to everyone else. However, sometimes the signs of abuse are attributed to disability and ignored. How easy it is for us to do that. Sometimes the disability causes conditions that mimic signs of abuse and are mistaken, causing parent and other care providers to erroneously be accused of the abuse. How many times you yourself would have been accused of abusing a child when it is in the normal course? Yeah? Physical neglect, very important. Physical neglect, more so isolation, most dangerous for children. Often people do not disclose the abuse for multiple fears and no apparent sign that help is available. And of course, emotional abuse. These are essentially the same again, however, verbal assault, threats, and withholding of attention are powerful tools of abuse and are used but are difficult to prove. How are you going to prove that? Thus, disclosure is delayed as the victim feels he or she has no proof of what has occurred. Depression, withdrawal, anxiety, and reenactment may be observed again if you understand the baseline, you will understand when the child or the person goes into depression, anxiety, worry, and then you can say to yourself, you know what? Something is going on. So when you talk about the family, and that is why I'm so excited about this work, because it is there to support families. Living with a disabled child can have profound effect on the entire family, parents, sibling, and the extended family members. We understand that that is traumatic in itself, and as a result of which, it gives rise to a number of things within the family. One, family breakup. I know a situation where from the time they heard the news, the man left. Yeah? And so the mother had to care for her other 3 children, and now this child living with IDD. We're talking about trauma shocking the entire system. And how then do you deal with that? We're talking about population-based research, particularly on demographic of economic outcomes. It's scanned. This morning we heard we don't have in Trinidad and Tobago a registry where we can identify readily families and or individual with people living with IDD. Therefore, we have no way of tracking what is going on within our families and how might we be able to help them. As a result, the work by this foundation is critical to bring families involved. So the impact on the family, sibling of children with IDD, are among those most influenced by their sibling diagnoses. Everyone in the system is affected. Everyone in the system is affected. The responsibilities of every person in the system changes because of this. And most times, not everyone is ready for this. Trauma-informed practices. Traditionally, we typically attribute challenging behaviors to the disability. We try to manage behavior often through some type of authority, control, or compliance. We focus on challenging behaviors and crisis intervention instead of mental health and wellness. How many of us put mental health and wellness at the front of the line when dealing with our children? How can trauma lens enhance traditional approaches? Traditional approaches have often assumed that IDD clients have limited capacity, and today we have learned that that is not so. Specifically, treatment do not emphasize to the relationship between the treater, the support person, and the client. It means that we have to have a multidisciplinary approach to treatment. So Dr. Karen again said that so many times I've witnessed where people were addressing the disability over the person without realizing that the situation they are in and that they are in a state of hyper arousal. It's nothing that an ordinary child would not experience. When we focus on IDD, we miss actual emotional issues. They too have emotional issues that require immediate attention. So when we look at effective treatment, requires the following 5 steps that I will leave with you. Prompt identification of abuse. Prompt identification of abuse. You need to know when it is happening, how it is happening, not 3 weeks down the road. So it means that extra attention needs to be paid to those children and or adults. Prompt referral for treatment. Prompt referral for treatment. I would like to see in Trinidad and Tobago a more synergistic referral network for people living with IDD. The time has come for us to bring all our resources together so that all people of Trinidad and Tobago, most of our children, can benefit real time. Treatment provided by a qualified therapist to primary and secondary victims. The family is also a victim, and they too need help to understand the trauma and to understand how to treat with the trauma. Treatment terminated appropriately. Treatment terminated when treatment is ended. That is important for children. And follow-up treatment available as needed. It is important for us to understand that trauma alters the lives of people, whether it is ordinary or whatever. Trauma affects us all. And just like you and I will need trauma treatment if we are traumatized, so too are children and adults living with IDD. It becomes important for us to then understand that we must be able to read the science cues. We must be able to provide a treatment. And that is why my organization, the Center for Human Development Limited, is partnering with this network to provide that level of psychological and trauma treatment. We believe that it is time for our government, the Ministry of Education, to send people specifically, just like I'm excited with Paul and his team at USC, specifically to understand, to learn, to treat with our children and adults. We need to get special trained teachers. Our police and all our stakeholders need to be trained properly in dealing with and understanding this population. Until we do that, too many of our children will remain traumatized in the system. And that is something none of us can afford. I thank you.